I have some empathy for Mueller in terms of the amount of time that this has taken. And there's one thing that has happened that I think has not gotten enough attention in the last couple weeks, which is with maybe it was still this week, everything blends together. But the significant part about Paul Manafort's, maybe it's helpful to Donald Trump if Paul Manafort isn't cooperating, not just not cooperating, but funneling information to Donald Trump. But when the president comes out and says a pardon for Manafort is not off the table and basically signals that if he just, stays silent, he could get a pardon. That is, from my point of view, close to obstruction and witness tampering in plain sight. And you're digging yourself in further.
And there's a bigger picture here. Look, we're talking about politics and political timing and all of that and the rule of law. But running the executive branch of the United States government is a big job. Being commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the United States at a time when we still have troops deployed overseas is a big job. Being the leader of the free world, to the extent that we can still claim that mantle, is a really big job. And having a president who is dealing with court battles, impeachment battles, all of that, and not dealing with the business of the country is a problem.
We're getting a real-time example right now. The leader of the free world cannot confront the world, Europe's chief adversary right now.
Yeah.
Because he's politically compromised, pure and simple.
So they can't have this meeting. I think the other thing that I would be concerned about from what you were saying is that if they really are moving up the chain and we find out something about a son or a daughter of Trump, how do you focus on your job if your kid has just been indicted? I don't know.
One of the reasons why I think some people want nepism laws for that reason. No, I mean, it is real. That goes to exactly why there was questions about whether you want to have
exactly
people at work.
And honestly, from a political point of view, from a pure, crass political point of view, if I were the president facing these kind of charges, I would want to confront Vladimir Putin's regime in the most public manner possible. I would want to go to the G20.
The last time he was public with the president of Russia
Helsinki. I know, which is exactly the opposite of what you should be doing.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.